the thing that I think is painful for so many people, including myself, is that for the world and Gaza, nothing has changed. Like this is what people were hoping for. And so when I heard about the ceasefire, I know I should be happy. This was scary. This is something that could spiral out and lead to World War III and unimaginable death and destruction. But I can't help but feel disappointed because I think for so many of us that were watching what has been unfolding in Gaza over the past 21 months, when Iran started striking Israel, that was kind of on behalf of all of us. And I think that's something that the whole world kind of felt, that finally there's going to be some justice for all these evil deeds, that we can see the end to this genocide in Gaza, that we can end this destruction. But it doesn't seem like Gaza even entered into the conversation with the ceasefire. It's just forgotten. I mean, the level of carnage that we're seeing in Gaza is just becoming more horrific because these are starving people looking for food, and every day they're just getting gunned down. It's like, this is your choice. You starve to death, or you try to go to one of these aid points and just wait for the IDF to start blasting tank shells or opening machine gun fire into the crowd. It's crazy.
Yeah. Right. I've heard more than 500 aid seekers have been killed since, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began its operations. This NGO that is, according to reports, is Mossad funded, and is clearly being used as a weapon to, work in coordination with the IDF to actually, not really to relieve the humanitarian disaster there, but to facilitate ethnic cleansing. It's only down there in the south, there's something I believe 1 million don't even have access to. 1 million Gazans don't even have access to the aid that they're providing, which is again far below what's really needed. It's the whole thing is just it's a cruel charade, and it continued throughout the 12-day war. More than 500 were killed. There was just daily massacres, daily atrocities at these aid sites. And the war unfortunately just seemed to have the effect not of slowing down these atrocities in any way, reducing them, but rather of just diverting the world's attention from them. So if it wasn't for the war, there may have been actually an increased outcry and increased pressure on Israel to do something. But the whole world was looking, had their eyes turned towards Tehran. So, even if it gave you some hope that this was going to bring about the end of the Gaza horror, actually in the short term anyway, it was having the opposite effect. And now maybe there will be more focus on what's happening in Gaza, and that the world will continue to turn against Israel.
I think what a lot of people were hoping for, at least myself, was that if it's true that Israel really was wanting the ceasefire, that Iran would put a little bit of pressure on Israel. Stipulation say, okay, well, we will agree, we won't fire any more missiles if you allow more aid into Gaza, or just stop, withdraw from Gaza, just pull. Like, this is, at the end of the day, this is the root cause of everything.
Yeah.
The fact that it just wasn't mentioned, and I just feel like if you're a Palestinian living in Gaza, you see this war, you feel like, oh, finally somebody's coming to save us. That there's being, that this Iran has finally stepped up to the plate. Israel's getting hit. This nightmare might finally end. And then they have this pause, ceasefire, and it's like, nothing's happened. We're still starving. They're still shooting us. And it's just like, okay, here we go. Now we're just going to have to watch this grind. And people are saying now, admitting that, I think the IDF is using a number that maybe they've vanished 400,000 people, so, which sounds like to be honestly a more accurate number. I don't know if that's verified at all, but I just lost my train of thought. But there's just this, you just think that they're going to continue to slaughter these people, continue to starve them until what? Until this breaks over again, until people have had enough, until Israel strikes Iran again. Like, what are we waiting for? I just want, I want international bodies. I want the United States to just say, stop it, just done. And maybe that's what it's possible. We had this idea that Netanyahu completely owned Trump, and that's how I was feeling. And maybe that's completely true, but it does sound like Trump is pretty upset with Netanyahu. So is there a bit of resistance there? Can he put the pressure and just say, I'm done with you, Israel? Is he aware how close Netanyahu dragged the United States into a complete disaster? I'm sure they sold Trump with like, we'll do the sneak attack, boom, it'll be over, quick and easy. You'll have this big victory parade, regime change. And they probably believed it themselves, because I imagine like they've been working on this operation probably for decades, infiltrating it, and then it didn't work, and now Trump is like, okay, now I got this big mess on my hands, and I don't want to have it go any further. Maybe he can turn it around.
Yeah.
You think it's possible? I don't want to put any hope in Trump, but it's just like that's all we have. Okay. That's all we have.
Yeah, I'll answer that. That's a very important question, but let's see. I'll just first go to that study that you mentioned, that there may be, well, I think it was 377,000 actual deaths in Gaza as a result of the war. That was a study that was done by an Israeli professor, but in cooperation with an institute at Harvard. And I think it was maybe published through Harvard. So, we're talking about top-level researchers. Now, it's based on the IDF's own population estimates. They estimated how many Gazans were in different districts, let's say, within Gaza. And it just simply added them up, and it falls 377,000 short of what, the let's say the pre-October 7th total was. So where do those people go? Now, that doesn't prove anything, because, maybe the IDF's estimates are off, right? I don't know, but I imagine these people, I haven't actually read the study. Again, these are high-level researchers, and so they have some reason to have some confidence in the statistics. And I find that statistic actually very believable. We've talked about how the limitations of let's say the Gaza Health Authority figures. These are things that they can verify. People, who've actually died in their hospitals, or bodies that have been brought to their morgues, where they have direct evidence. They're actually very careful, and they've been very, very careful, very conservative. But in the chaos and all the destruction that has been meted out to these hospitals, their ability to collect information has greatly diminished. And then there was always the problem of people buried under rubble. And I mean, it was more than half of Gaza is just rubble now. And in that first ceasefire, one of the promises that the Israelis did not fulfill is that they didn't provide equipment for actually clearing the rubble. So we still don't know how many people are under the rubble, or people that were just simply vaporized by the bombs, because that's what happens when a large bomb falls directly on top of you. And then there are all the indirect deaths, right? The people that are dead because the hospital was destroyed and they couldn't get treatment. The people who are malnourished and become sick and then die. All of that, to say that it was 377,000, I find that a very believable figure. But anyway, let's set that aside. And then there's this other question about Trump. Is Trump actually independent? Is he calling the shots? And I think, we've seen this often enough. I don't think it's a charade. Some people think it's all an act. But, there have been these incidents going back where Trump, seems to call the shots. I think he really does, at least in the short run. He gets angry at Netanyahu, which is very easy to do. Other leaders have expressed their frustration at him. They find him a very, very difficult man to deal with. He's constantly stabbing you in the back, for one thing. They understood, these previous presidents and have understood that you just have to hide that. You have to hide your hatred, and because that's policy. They're again just sort of instruments of the policy. But Trump is, for whatever you want to say about him, he's just kind of a more natural figure. He clearly says what's on his mind, and a lot of what's on his mind is just nutty, frankly. But some of it is quite true. One thing is, I think, his annoyance at Netanyahu is something that he can't always hide. And remember that initial ceasefire, that seems to be a time when he put the screws on Netanyahu. But of course, also remember that that ceasefire was broken, and that there was kind of an understanding that that Netanyahu got out of him that this ceasefire would be broken in the future. So I don't think we should place a whole lot of confidence. I think we see again occasionally in these kind of in the short run, Trump will assert his independence, but in the long run, it seems like the Zionists get their way. I think it's because again, Trump is not a strategic thinker. He's very impulsive, and then he has surrounded himself by people that are committed Zionists and who are strategic thinkers. So sometimes he goes off script, but he's got these people around him that are always working to get him back on, get him to continue, going down that road that they had actually designated for him, and to achieve that objective, which they want to achieve, namely the overthrow of the Iranian government. And I think eventually, it won't be, I don't know how long this will go on, how long the ceasefire will last, but it won't last forever. And eventually we'll be back at war, and Trump will be doing their bidding. They will work on him, and they'll get him to do what they want him to do. And Netanyahu will be deploying his assets, and he'll eventually get Trump to re-enter the fight, or at least to support the Israelis in a new wave of attacks.
So that's what we're looking at. Both sides, Iran and Israel, are just beefing up for round two.
I think so. Yeah, it's hard for me to believe this is this has been an obsession with Netanyahu and the Israelis for decades, and I don't think they're going to walk away from this. They're not going to let they achieved only a small fraction of what they hoped to achieve. They failed overall. They're still standing now. The Iranians are angry. The Iranians know what the Israelis are up to. They know about their covert network, and they're rolling it up. And the Iranians also did some real damage. This is not something that the Israelis are going to just let, say bygones be bygones. I can't remember who it was that pointed this out, but if you remember, I guess you don't remember. This was you were just, I don't even know, you weren't even born then, were you? Or maybe you were just a little baby. In the first Gulf War, the Iraqis, Saddam Hussein fired, I think, a total of, I don't know how many, but dozens of Scud missiles into Israel. And not one of them was shot down. Back then, the Israeli and the American air defense technology was really very primitive. There was some sort of pretense at 90% or even 100%, but people really looked at not one was shot down. Now, these missiles really didn't do much damage. They were not very effective. They were very, I think, inaccurate, and they didn't have very large warheads. But it was something that, even so, the Israelis just felt like they could not tolerate. It was a sign of weakness, and back then it was certain Israelis actually just swore vengeance, and eventually we saw what happened to Iraq. There was I think that's actually an important parallel. Stop and look at what happened to Iraq. We had the first Gulf War, but it didn't end, right? The Americans said, okay, yeah, we achieved our objectives. It's all over. But eventually, the true regime change operation went through. Of course, in that case, it took many years. I don't think it's going to be many years in this case.
Could Iran, if they don't want a conflict, do they have a couple of options? One is they could try to pursue the bomb. They'd have to do it in secret, and but I imagine it'll probably leak out that it's happening. And then what does that mean for Israel and the U.S.? Are they going to move quick because the U.S. has staked its whole reputation on that our goal is no nuclear weapon?
Well, it is a dangerous move for them. Yeah, you can understand why they would want to have the bomb for obvious reasons. I don't think we even need to really restate them here. But if they go for the bomb, and the Americans and the Israelis learn about it, that's a huge red flag. That's going to provoke, the Israelis, and could very well become, the excuse, the pretext for another attack, maybe a joint Israeli attack on a larger scale of Iran. I mean that so it's a risky venture. Now, if they can pull it off, they can do it quickly enough before the whole effort is discovered. Then, yeah, clearly they're in a stronger position. Then announce we do have the bomb. I think at that point it's okay, game over. It's just Israel's not going to risk having Tel Aviv nuked.
Is there another option? I actually heard this from Pepe Escobar that countries like Russia or China, Pakistan, these other nuclear powers in the area don't have to give Iran a nuclear weapon, but they can say that they are under our protection, that we give you sort of a nuclear umbrella, so that Israel or the United States, if you ever think about using a nuclear weapon against Iran, note that, okay, Iran, we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. Nobody wants them to have a nuclear weapon. Iran doesn't want to have a nuclear weapon. It seems like Israel wants them to have a nuclear weapon, so the United States will attack it. That seems to be the only country that wants Iran to go for the nuke almost.
Right.
But if they have that rule and say that, okay, that this Iran is under our protection, you can't touch it, because they're not a nuclear power, but they're now under the protection of nuclear powers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's not forget that according to Putin himself, the Russians offered a mutual defense pact, similar to what was signed between Russia and North Korea. They offered that to Iran. And Iran refused, incredibly. Pezeshkian refused.
Can be put back on the table?
Yeah, but that's what I was just going to say, is that maybe they could go ahead and actually add those clauses to that strategic partnership agreement that was very recently signed and very recently ratified. So, and if that happens, okay, it doesn't, it wouldn't be an explicit promise to extend the nuclear umbrella over Iran, the Russian nuclear umbrella, but I think it would be implicit, and it's something that the Israelis and the Americans would have to respect, and they would be, make them very reluctant to actually go to war with Iran if they notice, they understand that they're going to. I don't think they're crazy enough to try it, but we never know. If they attack Iran, they're attacking Russia too, and they could have World War III on their hands. Now, we've already seen like one nuclear facility that was not bombed. It was the Bushehr facility in Iran. It was not attacked by the Israelis or the Americans. And why is that? It's because the Russians are there, working on it. They have engineers there, have technicians there. And the Russians apparently warned the Israelis, do not attack this facility. Our people are there. So, I mean, if the Russians move in, another thing they can do is actually just like say, okay, we're going to help you rebuild your civilian nuclear program. And we're going to send our, technicians to these different places and help you, effect repairs. There are different things they can do. That's a possibility. So this is what we'll see. Hopefully Pezeshkian has woken up to his mistakes and will encourage this a more thoroughgoing strategic partnership. A greater involvement and greater support from the Russians.
So is this potentially the best case scenario we can look at, is if that a country like Russia does offer a mutual defense pact with Iran, then that will make the cost of the U.S. going to war with Iran so high that it just won't happen. Yeah. And Israel will also just couldn't do it on its own. So maybe that, we can avoid all this disaster. But then that's great for Iran, great for the region. Well, does this mean the end for Israel if they like that shining jewel that they've always been trying to get has just been pulled out of reach? It's not even on the board anymore because of the protection provided by these superpowers in the region. Is Israel, it almost seems like the raison d'etre is to go to war with Iran. What's going to happen if Iran is protected and then the axis of resistance is something that is now etched in stone that they can't get rid of? Their dreams of greater Israel may never be realized,
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it's interesting. it certainly helps Iran. I don't know what the impact would be on Hezbollah and the Houthis and so on and so forth. I guess maybe one reason that the Iranians are somewhat reluctant to kind of um, to seek Russian support. Well, they already have Russian support, but to intensify that and expand that is that they may feel that it reduces their own scope of action. It does reduce their independence somewhat because the Russians may want them to be more cautious in their support for maybe other members of the Axis. I don't no way are they going to tell them you got to stop it, but they may discourage potential offensive actions against Israel. Um,
But it sounds like the Houthis are pretty autonomous.
yeah,
I mean, Iran doesn't seem to like. Lindsey Graham likes to say that it's
right.
all directed by the Ayatollah, but from my understanding is that Iran's like the Houthis. Those guys are crazy. They do their own thing. We don't control them.
Yeah, yeah. They're often described as proxies. Hezbollah, the militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis. They're all described as proxies, but they're not. That's an inaccurate description. They are independent entities that receive support from Iran. That's it. They're not. They don't take orders from Iran. And so anyway, I brought up the effect of let's say Russian support for Iran. I don't know if that would have any impact or not. And the Russians may not. I think maybe wouldn't interfere. I mean, I may be wrong to suggest that they might try to put the brakes on it. That's one thing that Iran has made clear is like in the negotiations with the U.S. Hey, this is between us and as a sovereign nation and these other groups. This is not something that's on the bargaining table. So I imagine they would say the same thing to the Russians, that they would maintain these relationships no matter what, and the Russians would respect it.
What are you watching for next now? What are you waiting for? Israel to break the ceasefire or something
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, well, I think Israel will break the ceasefire. We'll see if they try to give the Iranians the Lebanon treatment. Start violating in the ceasefire in different ways, and we'll see if the Iranians respond forcefully. I think they just have to. They can't let themselves become another Lebanon. um, I think there was. I saw some report that there was the Israelis had a surveillance drone over Iran, and the Iranians were trying to shoot it down. I don't know if they were successful in that, but that's not clear that it's a violation of the ceasefire, but it could be considered one. We'll see. Um, yeah, I think I I guess my guess is that we're not going to see anything soon. A real violation, an attempt to launch a new attack. I may be wrong. Maybe again, like this is all just a ruse, and that it's a way. In fact, the Israelis do have stockpiles, and they're hiding this fact. We have to admit that that's possible. We do our best with the information we have, and they're going to actually launch another surprise attack very soon. But if the reports that we're getting are true, and I think they probably are, they are, have severely depleted stockpiles and are not ready for any serious, conflict with Iran. And it's going to take them weeks, probably many, months to reconstitute their forces. So I don't think we're going to see anything soon, but I may be wrong. I think that the ceasefire will last for a while, but
It's got to
who
be
knows what's at play behind the scenes right now.
it's got to be a tough calculation for Israel, right? I mean, because it seems to be clear that Iran can produce missiles at a faster rate than all of the collective West can be producing the interceptors required to shoot down these ballistic missiles. I
Right.
mean, we're talking about the production capacities are in the single digits per month. I mean, you have to
Right.
fire 2 interceptors. I think,
Right.
I think Patriots we build a bit more, but I mean, these are also being spread out. Ukraine has been needing a lot of them. We need some
Right.
ourselves with our bases. It's just so the longer you give as a respite, the benefits all going to Iran. Okay, Israel carries out an attack after we did it. We stockpiled 200 interceptors.
Yeah.
Okay, in 24 hours, they're all gone. When Iran retaliates. So I think they have to be thinking hard about it. Like these hard realities have to be hitting the Israelis. I wonder how they're feeling. I'm sure there was this feeling of elation when Trump finally sent those B-2 bombers and like, this is it. The United States is in the fight. They're coming to save us. Woohoo. And then Trump says, okay, now it's over. And now a bunch of Israelis are sitting in the destruction saying, this isn't how it's supposed to end. What now? Right. Because if we start this up again, the U.S. isn't getting hurt because Iran doesn't want to go to war with the U.S. If we start this again, Israel gets hurt. Israel's the one that's just going to continually get pounded. And if anything, this so-called 12-day war has shown us is that there is a certain amount of resilience in Iran, that they can absorb damage. And even with these sneak attacks, these car bombings, assassinations, you didn't achieve it. And the ability to continue that level of operation, because that seemed to be really the most damaging thing. And then it's kind of unclear exactly what was being done in damage in Tehran via, the Israeli Air Force, or was it on the ground drones and car bombings and assassinations? I feel like the Israelis got to be feeling upset. And then this is going to put a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. It's like, whoa, good job, buddy. Look at the state of Israel now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, this is this was probably their best shot. They'll never have a shot like this again. And to all appearances, they failed.
And they have to be thinking hard about it, like we're thinking about it. They got to come to that conclusion. Some of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same time, you have Netanyahu, who is also thinking, damn, now he got a boost. I mean, these 12 days were great for him because even the left supports, by a slim majority, supported the war against Iran within Israel. So there was this rally around the flag effect there, but it's going to have to wear off quickly. And he's going to be faced with the same domestic problems that he was faced with before, and probably they will intensify. Now, it seems by and large, the Israelis are not questioning the attack on Iran, but I think as the days goes by, they will begin to, and it'll just add to Netanyahu's troubles. But that just gives again Netanyahu an incentive to attack Iran again, just recklessly. But can he? That's the big question. Can he?